Hi, everybody. I'm Margery Kraus. I'm the founder and executive chairman of APCO Worldwide, and I'm very pleased to be here at SPECTRA. And I hope that my comments will be helpful to you as you're gathering all this information on reputation and on purpose. And what I wanted to do today was to talk a little bit about our view of purpose and why it's important, and to especially focus on the power of connections and how that can help you achieve your goals. So I'm going to try to talk for a few minutes, and then hopefully we'll have some good discussion afterward. So going to the first slide, I wanted to talk a little bit about the context for what we're talking about. The very fact that I'm talking to you from my home in Virginia and not there in person, really is an example of how the world has changed. So we know that today we're facing a global crisis like one we've never seen before. It makes it much more complicated and hard to predict what's ahead. In fact, I have told our teams that we're going to look at this every 3 months because we don't know exactly when this crisis will end and how we should adjust our behavior. And so we kind of call it the next normal, not the new normal, because it keeps changing. And then we're also facing a world of increasing division and acrimony and nationalism, which is not a helpful context for a business which likes certainty. And we're all full of concerns about the economy and the increasing impact of the virus and other factors, which makes income inequality greater. And that creates less of an environment of stability. And of course, all this digitization is increasing at a rapid speed. And so a lot of companies are looking at what they need to do going forward and how they operate in this environment. So one of the things that came up a few years ago at the World Economic Forum is Klaus Schwab said that every company needs, on the next slide, to have two things, a radar and a compass. And I like to think of this as what we've been doing all along. The radar gives us an ability to see ahead, an ability to look around the corner, an ability to think about how the world is changing. And all the noise that's out there. But the compass is what drives us. It's what helps us kind of achieve our direction. And so every company, I think, and every person doing your kind of job needs to have both this ability to look broadly through radar and ability to focus through a compass. And I think it's just an interesting way to think about things. And if we go to the next slide, it says a little more about what is in each one. So for radar, again, the ability to see through the fog, for mapping your relationships, for anticipating what's ahead, understanding kind of the new anti-globalism or geopolitical context in which we all have to work, and also to manage risk in this era of rapid transparency. On the compass side, it is what is our true north? What is our higher purpose? What is our mission, our vision, our values? And how do we operate with integrity and authenticity against that? And so, we've been hearing a lot about purpose, and especially in this post-pandemic, as people are thinking about what happens next, purpose has become a lot more important to companies because it allows us to have more of an engaged workforce. It demonstrates our authenticity, and it fosters this relationship with stakeholders and stake brokers, as we call them, the people who are out there who are really thought of as thought leaders in their various fields and who are important to your company. And then ultimately, what we've seen is the companies with this real focus on purpose that's profits beyond what goes to your shareholders. This is your contribution to society. It's why you exist. That companies with a clearer purpose also tend to perform better and contribute more to the bottom line. And we're going to talk a little more about that. But So I wanted you to have in your mind this radar and compass, and as you're thinking about a framework for what you're doing, hopefully that will be helpful. So if we go to the next slide, this is my kind of measure, I guess you'd say, of why it's so important and why there is such a contribution to the bottom line when companies are purposeful and think about society. Because truly, there is no such thing as a successful company in a failed world. If your company wants to be successful, you have to think about society. If there's no natural resources, and I know water in India has been a particular issue, then how do you have companies there that need to have these natural resources? If you don't think about society and people don't benefit from your being as a company, how do you have customers? How do you have employees? So truly, there's no such thing as a successful company if the world around you has failed. And that should be ultimately the reason that every company has to think about its purpose. So this is just on the next slide. It gives you kind of a little more of context for purpose. The COVID-19 has really highlighted the inequities in our system, and social risk is now a big factor, a new factor. So companies are expected to be engaged in the issues of our time. And a lot of companies over the years have thought, well, that's politics and this is business. And how come we need to be engaged? And the truth is that there's a risk of not being engaged. I think the expectation of companies today is much higher, that companies will, in fact, be looking at what is important about them, that what is aligned with their interests, that are also aligned with the interest of the various stakeholders they have as a company. And so this has become really important. And what we've seen in the post-COVID world, or as people are thinking about this idea of coming back stronger, what does that mean to them? And a lot of them are thinking about, well, if we have to rebuild, let's rebuild better. Let's be more focused on our impact on climate, for instance. Let's think about what we can do that makes us more competitive in terms of attracting new workers. What have we learned about working from home that will allow us to be more efficient in the future? So, and then how do we do this in a way that provides more equality to, and really more justice to the people we serve, whether they're employees or their customers? The second thing is related, and that is that society has definitely created a much more, with these big problems, a much more important for businesses to take the lead. None of these big problems of our time are going to be solved by government alone, or by NGOs alone, or by business alone. But people look to business because it's very focused on how to get things done, and the impact of business in society probably has never been greater. And so there is a rising expectation that business will take the lead, especially with governments with fewer resources today, and a lot of inexperience. There's a lot of new people running governments around the world, and so business is kind of ubiquitous. It goes from market to market to market, and it has a much better sense, I think, of things that work, and so it has a role to play. And you can see the numbers here that 94% of people, by our own research, believe companies can help shape a better society, and that 77% say they would admire a company that uses its business interests and expertise. And this is way beyond charity. This is really about social purpose. And then the latest trend, and I don't know how much this is apparent from your vantage point in India, but certainly we see this in the Western markets, is that the people who are investing money, whether it's BlackRock or whether it's others, that they are looking for, in their investment analysis of a company, they're looking for the way that they respond to ESG, environment, social, and governance factors. and especially in this time. And so there are growing expectations that companies will also, from a performance point of view, if they're taking these factors into account, that they will perform better and therefore make for a better investment. And also they'll have a more stable workforce. And I think this idea of workforce stability and workforce happiness is an indicator of success for a business that these investors are now paying a lot more attention to than they did in the past. And so hopefully that's a trend that will continue. And you can read a little more about the detail of this. So if we go to the next slide, so what are the benefits of corporate purpose, and why are people talking about this so much? Well, I already said a little bit about raising capital. I think the other part that we talked about was the retention of greater talent, but also meeting the expectations of their stakeholders, whether they're customers or whether they're employees or whether they're investors and so forth. And then it maximizes their positive impact. And I like to call this reputational equity. When you think about reputational equity, I think about deposits in the bank, the reputation bank, so that you can withdraw them if you have a problem or if you're trying to create an opportunity. That the benefit of the doubt resides with the company when you're able to build this reputational equity by your actions and by your consistency and by your purpose. And then you can help drive leadership on issues like social justice. And so the company's growth, it puts the wind at your back when you have a true north that you can all point to. And I'll give you some examples in a little bit. So if we go to the next slide, this is something that APCO designed a few years ago, but we find in our research that we've been doing with companies over the past 20 years that actually this is something that you might use as a framework to look at your own companies or look at your clients' companies. So I've always thought of this as a pyramid, and we call this like the 4 A's that create a champion brand. What are those factors that create a champion brand? And it all starts with alignment. And this is where if you have a clearly defined purpose, it's easier to get people to align around that purpose, as opposed to kind of wandering around the wilderness a little bit, the corporate wilderness. So alignment is first and foremost, getting all the people aligned around what you stand for. The second thing is authenticity. And authenticity in this day and age is more important than ever in these days of radical transparency. But the authenticity is, do you walk the talk? If you say you stand for something, do you behave in a way that supports what you stand for? Because otherwise it's just lip service, it's just talk, it's not action. So authenticity becomes a really important factor. And then the third thing is this area of attachment. And what does that mean exactly? Is there an emotional bond between your stakeholders, your customers, your financiers, your employees to the company? Do they feel something for that company? And attachment is this enduring feeling about the company. But the top of the pyramid is advocacy. And this isn't like lobbying advocacy. This is the mutual interest. This is standing. This is actually purpose. It's what do you stand for? Because that is ultimately what drives everything else. So hopefully that's an interesting way for you to think about this. And if we go to the next slide, this is really, how does this relate to all of you? And so part of putting all this together is that the CCO, the Chief Communications Officer, becomes, among other things, the Chief Connections Officer, making sure that the company and its messages are aligned with all its constituencies, and that you are using the corporate purpose to reach out to those with shared interests, and helping to create this reservoir of friendships and relationships so that you are building your reputational equity. And so this is on the next slide. talks a little more about this evolving role of communications. You know, and we live in a world where communications maybe at one time was about sending out press releases or sending out messages from a company. Now it's about really engaging in meaningful dialogue. And that's how you create this ecosystem for your company. So the role of the CCO, which is constantly evolving, is really stepping up now um, with the greatest challenges of all and being an important part of the C-suite. We're not just listeners, we're responders. And we have to respond based on the values that we know that our company has. So we're the first ones, we're the line of fire on behalf of our organizations in hosting dialogues and bringing in input and making informed decisions. And so it's way beyond the time of spreading information. So we're the authentic link between the company and society. We're driving values. We're interpreting the needs of stakeholders. We're creating cross collaboration. And we're really building a network of relationships for the organization. And if we go to the next slide, and this is at the heart of what we were talking about in being a connector. These relationships really do matter because they build business and they build reputational equity in difficult times. They create partnership opportunities to grow your business and expand the horizons of what's possible. And they help you reinforce what you learn from each other. So that's really important. And so I just wanted, before I closed and take questions and have a dialogue on a couple of things. I wanted to talk a little bit about how APCO has done it, how we see purpose, and then I wanted to give you examples from some of our clients that we think are outstanding and how they've addressed this. So how we've done it is I started this company with just myself 36 years ago. And what was I trying to do? And maybe I didn't even realize it at the time, but over time, is that I really wanted to have a place where really smart people could come together, have a fulfilled career, solve important problems, and create collaborations, not just for our clients, but hopefully they contributed to a better world. But a big part of this was to have really smart people, and you'll see this says, and nice people, because I believed that the best way to build a firm was to have like-minded people who respected each other and who could work in collaboration to come up with better solutions for the world and for our clients. And that was a really important thing to me. So how did this lens kind of come across APCO? What impact did it really have? And on the next slide, I tried to explain a little bit about that it really did create a DNA and a culture for our organization that has stood the test of time. Inclusivity was always important. We're the largest globally women-owned company, and so it was very important for us to not to have a glass ceiling and to have a place where men and women of all nationalities were truly equal, and that promotions and everything else were based on merit. So it created this idea of a very global marketplace where people were judged based on their performance and not anything else. We also created this culture of one company so that the regions help each other. So we have one bottom line for the entire company. So it's really about the collective performance of everybody. So everybody's incentivized to make the company better because we're majority employee owned. And then I think on execution, it's the respect of knowing that your colleagues have experience that maybe you don't have, and bringing the best people to the client really does create the best solutions. And it's a combination of their IQ and what we call their EQ, and that's their ability to get the people side of it and not just the substance side of it. And so we are very proud of this, and it is something that has stood the test of time and that drove us. And so maybe we were thinking about purpose before we knew what it was exactly, but it did help drive the growth of the company. And so from that, on the next slide, I just wanted to give you some other examples of how companies have come up with their purpose and their true north. as a way to help meet the times in which they live. And so the first one was IKEA, who we've been fortunate enough to work with for a while. And IKEA is passionate, their CEO passionate about their climate issues. And so they've done a lot of things, like they joined the We Mean Business Coalition, which is a coalition of companies on climate change, setting very ambitious business targets and helping reach those targets through partnerships and through their relationships. They're part of the Alliance of CEOs on Climate Change, climate leaders through the World Economic Forum, which allows them to kind of have a bully pulpit to get other companies involved. They're strategic partners with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation on the circular economy. And I could go on because they learn to walk the walk, and they've put their money into things that help them be better stewards of the environment and help to be passionate leaders with other companies. And that's what we mean really by the authenticity of that. And so they're a great example. Recently, another example is Microsoft, and you may have heard their recent commitment on water, that they want to leave every place better than they found it. And so they have an ambitious commitment for positive, to become water positive by 2030, which means replenishing more water than it consumes. And for that, they're partnering with groups like the Vector Center, the Freshwater Trust, Upstream TAC, Leadership Council on Social Justice, and their own customers like Schneider Electric and Ecolab. So you can see how not only if you have purpose and direction, but it also creates a chance for partnerships that you might not otherwise have had. And so the last one I will talk about is MIT Solve. And that's a partner of ours because it allows us to extend our platform, and we help them promote the fact that they create a competition at MIT to bring together solutions for really hard problems. And so some of those solutions and their challenges that they develop allow us to kind of share the results and maybe allow other people to take some of their ideas and solve their own problems better. And so there's a lot of examples like this, so we could go on. But I know I'm getting to the end of my time, and hopefully some of this resonates with you and will be useful and interesting for you as you think about how to use all of this. And so with that, in closing, I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts. I think we're sitting at a really interesting place as communicators, because I think the world has never needed better communication and more of it. Because if we're going to bring people together, they need to understand what we're talking about, how it affects them, and to understand their point of view so that we can come together in common cause to solve some of these global problems. And so I think as you're sitting there, hopefully this has helped provoke some thinking and helping us all to expand our horizons a lot. And I don't think of any of this as a challenge. I think of it all as an opportunity. And maybe that's just my attitude about life. I don't see too many problems that don't become opportunities, even in this pandemic. I think it's enabled us to think differently and think more creatively about our own futures, future of work, how we solve problems together, how we help each other get through some difficult times, and all of the things related to the times in which we live. And so I've kind of adopted a motto in life that I hope, and I'll leave you with this because I hope it will help everybody. But when you come into APCO's headquarters in Washington, we have 30 offices around the world, and 2 in India. But when you come into the Washington office, it says, think big and have passion. And I hope that that's come across in this presentation, to think bigger than ourselves and to have passion in whatever else you do. So thank you for your time and for this opportunity, and I'm happy to take questions.
Marjorie, when I saw the topic, the power of connections and purpose, I was struggling, in fact, to figure out how these two came together. And I think you did a wonderful job with your presentation in bringing together the two. You also mentioned one very interesting thing, which was having one bottom line. And the reason that struck me was because in a world where businesses today are struggling for survival, how does something as incalculable as purpose, become even something to chase, when you're trying to keep your revenues, your bottom line, and profits going? How does it work for a company, and how will a company really be able to focus on something as immeasurable as purpose?
Well, there are a lot of people trying to measure this actually right now for exactly the reason that you're saying. But the statistics to date have shown that companies that are clear about who they are and what they stand for actually are doing better in the marketplace. And that there are some real statistics now that show that these purpose-driven companies are increasing their staying power. And part of this is the stickiness of people's priorities now, having gone through this epidemic and even before, of understanding that unless we all benefit, that we that the problems of the world are so great. So if companies, it's kind of what I was trying to explain about, if you don't consider society in the way in which you operate, eventually we will run out of natural resources. We will destroy the planet. We will have so much inequality that people won't have the resources to buy your product. It's like a common sense approach. And so I think as people measure this over time, it's much easier for companies to understand. And I think what was the tipping point was not just the pandemic, it was the investor community, companies like BlackRock, going out and saying very specifically that they're going to look at purpose and at this contribution beyond profits in the way they measure companies' success and the way they are calculating who they're going to invest in. So I think eventually, even the companies that don't really see this now will understand by looking at the companies that are successful. And it is hard when you have so many competing priorities, and survival being a big one of them. But I think that even the companies, we have a company that was a retailer that their business was tremendously hit, but yet this is the one thing that they really focused on in coming back stronger. And I think it created a loyalty that will enable them to be one of the first back in the game to sustain their business. So, I think time will tell, but I think what we see today is that this is now a standard part of business. This isn't like social responsibility and a nice thing to do. This is fundamentally an important part of driving business forward, is having a purpose to your business.
Thanks, Marjorie. That brings me to a different sort of a question. You spoke at length about how you have driven purpose in your company. And I think APCO Worldwide has an advantage in the sense that it is in the business of communication. So, communications, connections, and driving purpose through those connections probably comes a little naturally to APCO Worldwide. I've at least for some time worked for an oil and gas company, which also has to do a lot of communications. But how does a company like that, which, for example, has a very clear impact on sustainability or the future of the planet, how does a company like that directly link its business goals to a purpose?
We all know that the oil and gas industry has been very challenged recently by a lot of the climate movement. And I think if you look within the oil and gas industry, you'll see that some of the more progressive companies have embraced this idea of diversity of supply, whether it's solar or other nuclear or other forms of energy beyond fossil fuels. And I think that there's a slow migration in those companies, especially the ones that, as I say, are more progressive, to showing up differently and to letting people know that they are committed to a better climate, climate action going forward. And some of them will see which ones, which ones lead the way, and eventually, others will either follow or maybe disappear. But it is harder in some industries. But I think that I've noticed a change, even if you look at the way these companies are presenting themselves, that you can't ignore these big problems anymore. Aside from the social media and everything else, I think that consumers are smarter than they were before, and I think that people will vote with their pocketbooks. And there's all these companies right now that are making statements about the future of being either carbon neutral or other things, that the people who supply them are going to have to get on the bandwagon, or they're not going to have those customers. Those customers will go to other places that are more aligned with their own principles and purpose. And so I agree that sometimes some industries are slower, but I do think that's changing.
Thanks, Marjorie. Which brings me to my next question. I was reading a recent blog you have written, and I'm paraphrasing a bit. You spoke of the end of globalism even before COVID-19 pushed nations to protect their own interests, while the need of the hour literally is global problems need global solutions. And you mentioned briefly that that seems to be changing now because companies are looking at more holistic solutions and are trying to work together. How do you think that is shaping up now? Do you see the power of connections or reconnections, despite the move away from globalization? Do you see that driving a collective global purpose more now?
So this is to me, the big question is that the world is definitely, especially with borders being closed, with immigration issues, with other kinds of nationalism going on, there is this real interest in doing things closer to home and this move to nationalism. And that has been also, I think, aided by the withdrawal from some of these global agreements that the U.S. has done, and this rhetoric about these multi-stakeholder and multilateral organizations not being as effective as maybe they once were. So you have that happening, but then you also have things like a pandemic or climate change, things that don't stop at borders. So you have this need for these global solutions, and you have this energy moving away from these global meetings and these global activities. So I think there is a real push and pull going on. And my view is, I think that companies will look at supply chains and some of the disrupted business that happened because borders closed or because of other tariff issues, things like that, to try to figure out solutions for their supply chains that do not allow for as much disruption. And I think 3D printing and other things will also make it easier for companies to source things closer to their manufacturing. So I think that will go on. But I think it doesn't negate the need for some more rigorous global solutions. And I'm not sure what form they will take. And this is where partnerships, alliances, maybe like-minded companies getting together on specific issues, working on whether it's with World Health or whether it's working in other fields, where I think there has to be some kind of global solutions. And, it's the 75th anniversary of the UN, and there's a lot of discussion about what forms this might take in the future. So I don't have a good answer to how you reconcile those two things, but definitely I believe there's a push toward this regionalization or nationalization or being closer to where you need the supplies, but it doesn't negate the need for these global solutions and different kinds of leadership to meet those needs. So it's interesting times.
It really is because I think, I mean, in whatever sense that we see the world, I think there are coalitions and recoalitions sort of forming to help each other. It could be at a microcosm level or at a macrocosm level, but it's fascinating what's happening. Marjorie, on a somewhat unrelated, maybe not entirely, note, and I would be remiss if I don't bring this mentioned, and it is famously known that APCO Worldwide is the largest majority women owned communications firm in the world. I also speed read through your book, Roots and Wings, sharing 10 lessons from motherhood that helped you create and run this company. Do you find that you run the company, with values or connections within the company that are different or differently run from other companies? Does that make a difference in how you see purpose and how the company comes together to deliver on that purpose?
Well, I wish I could say that I was smart enough to figure all this out when I started the company, because it was just me. And now we're like 800 people around the world. But one thing that always drove me, this idea of roots and wings, and I didn't, and I'll explain in a minute, I didn't kind of understand that until I got a little bit uh, older and into this. But the idea for the book and the link between kind of what I learned over the years and how I applied it to the business is that when my children were growing up, I had a sign on the wall. It said, there are only two lasting things of value you give your children. One is roots and the other is wings. And I always felt that, if you had a strong foundation as a family and you understood what was important, you could give your children more freedom to grow because they knew right from wrong and they knew what decisions could be taken. And I didn't realize how much of that I brought to how I started and ran the company for years, which was to be very clear about what we stood for as a company and to attract people who kind of bought in to who we were, to our value system, to this idea of inclusivity, of empathy, of working, to achieve these higher results, of being very focused on our clients, on all these different things. And as we started these offices around the world and we hired people from these markets who we didn't know, but who kind of bought into our ideas, that it was that we did create a common culture around the world on the basis of being clear about what we stood for and who we were, and attracting people who subscribe to kind of our value system, I guess you'd say, which is a global value system. It's not based on Western values or Eastern values. I think they're common values of humanity. And so a lot of this was, I wish I could say that was I knew it, and that's the way we went for it. But it all happened, I think, as a matter of just, maybe what was important to me as the founder, and then what was important to other people who came into this because they believed in the company. Because certainly the success of APCO over the 36 years isn't about me at all. It's about finding like-minded people who came in and who were able to take what I knew and then multiply it in their markets and as a global firm. So I think when we look back today, and that's really why I wrote the book, I think it's two reasons. One is I think we can celebrate the fact that there are things we learn at home and that we do in our everyday life that actually help create your own value system, which is translated into having, being able to influence the environment in which you work, and certainly as a founder of a company, influencing the company as it goes forward. But also, I think that it also highlights maybe the importance of the common DNA as you build something together. And I think one reason that we were able to do this was that we did have roots as a company, and we were able to give wings to the people who ran our offices around the world because they understood what the freedom in the framework was, what abilities they could take with their own what they could do with their own abilities in their own markets, but still subscribe to the framework of APCO. And I think it allowed us to grow very fast and to grow very well in markets that were totally different than the home market, because we didn't like impose one size fits all. There was enough flexibility in that. And I think the other part of it is we learned from each other because we had this mutual trust and acceptance of each other. We were able to take the best ideas that worked in the East and bring them West, and vice versa, depending upon the subject matter and what we were trying to do. So the book is a reflection, I think, of those learnings over time, and also of a little special message maybe to women, that in spite of all the years of people telling you it won't work or you can't do it or it'll never happen, is to believe in yourself. Because I say in the book that nobody can make you feel inferior without your own consent. And so it's a lesson I learned over time that I think also gave me the courage to, our second office was in 1988 in Moscow, which at that time was pretty much unheard of for a Western company. But, over the years, we've just learned to take chances and go into places that were maybe perceived to be difficult by some people, and to try to build a collective that worked together in a very seamless way. And I feel very good about having accomplished that.
That was wonderful to hear, Marjorie, because I think it gives hope, because there are a lot of multinational organizations or global organizations, or essentially Western organizations, who, for example, try to reconcile with the different ways of working in other parts of the world. And while companies are only still thinking of treating other regions like adults, you've done something disruptive, like talking about the one bottom line, which to many companies will sound counterintuitive. So I hope that APCO Worldwide, in fact, becomes a case study and people look at it much more closely, because it gives the hope that companies can be interconnected as much as they need connections externally, and still deliver results and success the way other companies do, by pushing month on month and quarter on quarter results and revenues. So that was really insightful. Really appreciate all this conversation, Marjorie. That brings me to the end of my questions. And it has been lovely chatting with you, Marjorie. So I hope to do this in person sometime.
We've all been a little bit homebound, and for somebody like me who is used to visiting all our offices and saying hello to everybody, doing it virtually has been great, but not the same. So thank you very much for your questions and for your interest, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this.